The sound is calming, so that's a good thing. Let's hope it continues. Stops in the break and continues as we're... Okay. And then I thought maybe on the very last morning, I'll say a little bit about what happens once you have bodhicitta, right? How you get from there to enlightenment. It's really not, it can be very complicated, and I could fill a whole course on that, but that's not necessary. Just to give you the rough details, so you have a bit of a sense, oh, that's what's going on. And it's really totally logical, makes total sense, it's not that hard. And then based on that, everything else hopefully makes more sense. The emphasis on this, that, and the other. Yeah, so that's the plan for now. But let's start, as always, with... Oh, the mic is not... It's not working? Oh. That one. Oh, bring it closer. Okay, I have to speak up a little. If you can't hear me, please say so. Can you hear me okay? In the back, can you hear me? A bit more? Good? Yeah, more is coming. Of course, yeah. The external noise. Is that better? Is it better this way? Yes. Thank you, Shabbat. Okay, great. Okay. If you're not comfortable, you can always take like lots of cushions. There's still a few cushions around, so if that helps. Thank you. Great. Okay, very good. All right, and we start with breathing meditation. And then in the space in front of you, as an embodiment of all the enlightened beings, of everyone who's reached the awakened state of a Buddha. Visualize Buddha Shakyamuni. Who has limitless compassion and love for all sentient beings, as well as the profound wisdom, free from any mistaken appearance. Realizing how phenomena really exist. And remember that the the Buddha also represents your inner Buddha. In the form of your Buddha nature. And your future state of an enlightened being. And think that you're surrounded by all living beings, all sentient beings. Appearing in the form of humans. With those you have a hard time with, as they either don't like you or you don't like them, right in front of you. And then remember that they're just like us. That despite our differences, that are temporary and superficial, on a much deeper level, we all have the pure mind already, that in its nature doesn't differ from that of a Buddha. Since none of our afflictions and limitations are in the nature of our mind, and at the same time, sentient beings are equally important as we are ourselves. For our worldly as well as our spiritual well-being. so based on that understanding, generate this emotional closeness, towards every living being. Seeing them, if you like, as a part of you. Seeing them not only as extremely important, but also as endearing and worth of our concern. Our acceptance of them and our care. And then focus on the fact that they're totally controlled, as we ourselves, by the fundamental misconception of reality. Giving rise to self-centeredness, that is attachment to I and mine. To other afflictions. And as to all their sufferings and limitations. And generate a sincere affection that wishes for all of them, every single one of them, to be free from these mental afflictions and their causes, and thus their limitations. Together with the wish, may I be able to help them overcome all these. And this mind of great compassion then gives way to the altruistic resolve. A mind that is now not only aspiring, but determined. No matter how much time and effort it may take, to help sentient beings to overcome all the dissatisfactory experiences together with their causes. And since that is realistically only possible if we become enlightened first, we attain the awakened state of a Buddha, generate bodhicitta that is based on your deep compassion and altruistic resolve, generate the aspiration to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of every living being. And now as you recite the prayer, while reciting the first two lines, focus on the Buddha in the space in front of you, representing Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And the last two lines, focus on all sentient beings around you. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, by the two accumulations created by practicing generosity and the other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, by the two accumulations created by practicing generosity and the other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, by the two accumulations created by practicing generosity and the other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. It's hot. I don't know, I feel hot. No, it's fine. The voice, my voice is hoarse. Okay. Your tradition, for instance, you see, what we learn right now is described as the sutric level, as in sutras, sutric level of Buddhism, which in all three traditions, of course, is the same, but sometimes explained slightly differently. In fact, they say every Lama has his Dharma. So as in like, of course, like many times in the different traditions, they have head Lamas and Lamas that head the traditions, and so they have a different way based on how it was passed down. They have different ways of explaining things. So sometimes it seems very different, but when you learn about it, you realize, oh, it's just different ways of using the vocabulary. So in the basis, they are the same. And then on top of that, as like the next level, you have the tantric teachings. So Tantra. Tantra is not a philosophy as such. So philosophy you learn as part of the sutric teachings. There's some philosophical differences, yes, but it's not like you have to learn all this very complicated philosophy as part of the tantric level. It's more like very sophisticated techniques that they introduce to you. But for that, your mind has to be ready. If you start too early, Tantra is either a waste of time, or it can potentially even be harmful. For instance, visualizing that you arise as a Buddha. When we say a deity, really what we're saying is a type of enlightened being. And if you don't have the basis, that can turn into arrogance, into some kind of, I don't know, what's the word, the psychological word for like a narcissist, like a person who's like a narcissist, right? Yeah, like a maniac, yeah. I'm so much better than everyone else. You guys follow me, you know. Pardon? Yeah, like a superiority complex. It turns into that. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. Therefore, only when our mind is ready to do these practices, usually you find a teacher, a qualified teacher. Don't start on your own. Find a qualified Rinpoche, Lama, not just any Rinpoche you come across who's got time on their hand. Unfortunately, the very qualified ones usually don't have that much time, so you need to be patient and take it slow, make that connection with them, listening to their sutric teachings and really practicing them, and possibly at some point ask them to guide you. So don't do this on your own, because that is too dangerous. So from the point of view of visualizing yourself as a deity, and then if you go even further to practice on a level where you also apply the energy of your body, utilize, I mean, that can be so dangerous. In fact, I know a German man who used to live in the Cloudgunge near Tushita, a very subdued man, very good in his practices. He went to the library to receive teachings by Geshe Rinchen. So some years ago, the main teacher at the library in Gangchun Kishon, where a lot of people go to study, he was the main teacher. He had an incredible translator, and those two were a great team. And a lot of people received teachings from him, and they greatly benefited and really got a good grounding in the sutric level. But one day he decided he wanted to do Tantra, and didn't really practice it under the guidance of a qualified teacher. He went on his own, and he literally lost his mind. He lost his mind. He suddenly, I wasn't there when he basically lost the plot, but apparently they had to take him, the embassy had to send someone up and accompany him home. And years later he came back. I met him at the temple, and he still wasn't well. So it can go as, yeah. I don't want to really scare you in that way, but I also want you to know Tantra is very, very powerful, but as Lama Yeshe says, it's like a supersonic plane. What are these called? These incredibly fast planes that take you quickly somewhere, but you need to know how to fly it. Otherwise you can crash. You see, like anything that is very potentially potentially very powerful and can be potentially very beneficial, can also be potentially very dangerous. So, therefore, I want to warn you. So don't do it without the guidance of a teacher. Secondly, there are certain qualities you need to have, that you're supposed to have once you to study, practice Tantra, which is renunciation, bodhicitta, and the view of emptiness. It's called the three principal aspects of the path. These three. Now, if you have a qualified teacher, and even though these three, you don't have uncontrived renunciation and bodhicitta yet, they may say, okay, you're ready to do it anyway. You may take an empowerment if you have a strong connection with the Lama, even without getting the chance to get their permission. But no, this is to leave imprints in the mind, to prepare the mind once you're ready. But it's very important to focus on the sutric level. I mean, look at the Tibetan tradition that has been very successful to preserve the Dharma for more than 1,000 years with incredible practitioners. How many years do they spend just on the sutric level? Learning, reflecting, debating, and only afterwards they then go into Tantra, and they only start by practicing it, by studying it, not by going right into, okay. So it's very important to not, you know, like if you want to go deeper into the Dharma and you were to take like a ladder to go down, you know, you're not going to miss any of these steps, if you like, right? Because otherwise you could crash. So you take step by step, you go deeper into the Dharma. So don't miss any of these steps. Okay. All right. So now let's go back to a permanent. Yes, please? Yeah, we can take some questions if you want. We can do some questions first. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm thinking about how to incorporate what we studied with political activism or...
Oh, thank you. So, yeah.
So I was asking how can we use this, the teachings when we deal with like a political reality, and because in Israel, I mean, it's very discouraging right now, and I'm talking to my friends, and everybody's really, they're burnt out, they're discouraged, they feel despair, and it feels like you really have no way of changing reality, like you don't have any power.
Right.
And I can't just come back from India and tell everybody, oh, listen, I realize there is no self, so how can I be of benefit when I come back, when it seems like we have no real way to affect
Yeah, that's
reality?
important question. I think Buddhism, first of all, does not stand in contradiction to political activism at all. In fact, if you, for instance, think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I mean, for years, even though he's no longer as politically active as he used to be, but only in his official capacity as the leader of the Tibetans. However, if he had any opportunity to politically make a change, if there's no one else to do it, His Holiness would do it. So His Holiness is such a good example. His Holiness, it's okay. His Holiness is such a good example. He never gave up. He never lost hope. Therefore, even though, you see, oftentimes we just want an immediate result. And the causes and conditions, it takes time to come together. Now, if you think everyday life, we want to graduate from university. Let's say you enter school and you really want to graduate from university one day. But you still wait how many years would that take? You've got 4 years of this school, then, I don't know, middle school, then high school, then university. So you end up studying, 18 years or whatever, and only then. So you're not always looking ahead, the result. You continue just accumulating the causes and conditions. Sometimes it takes time. many times. So sometimes we want immediate results, and which is not always, it's not always the case that we won't get immediate results. But unfortunately, this takes time. So I guess on a kind of everyday level, saying, look, Israel didn't become, we didn't get Israel as our country. I mean, you know, Jews were all over the world and never had their own country, and one day they got it, right? So it took many, many years to just get that. And how long did it take it for Israel to become the modern country it is now? When first Israelis moved, when Jews moved to Israel, they didn't have Tel Aviv. How long did it take to build Tel Aviv? How long did it take to come to the level you are now? If the Zionists, the Jews who first arrived in Israel, if they had been like, we want Tel Aviv now, they probably would have, you know, given up, because it takes time. Everything takes time to build something. And I think a lot of people don't know that. But what's really impressive about Israel is that a lot of people there, because they moved into a desert, more or less, there wasn't much there. And they had to be ingenious about the water. Water was always an issue. So how do you get enough water for the fields? How do you make it efficient? There are a lot of inventions from Israel that we now benefit from. The dripping system. You know, like when you like in Germany in the past, most people used like a system where you sprayed your plants, you know, with just plenty of water, but most of the water never even went into the soil because it evaporated when it was too hot. So a lot of water got wasted. So some Israeli founded this system where you had like pipes on the ground with little holes, and they just kept dripping water into the soil very slowly. They were dripping all day long. So you needed very little water, and as it consistently dripped into the soil, it didn't evaporate. You didn't waste much water, but could still grow, you know, all that food. That's an Israeli invention. The thumb drive or the pen drive, that's an Israeli invention. So it's incredible if you look at what comes from Israel, a very tiny country with only what, 6 million, 5 to 6 million, maybe 8 billion now people, and how many inventions come from this country. It's incredible. So you see, if you bring this to mind as an Israeli person, look what we've accomplished. And of course, not everyone has invented the thumb drive or pen drive. Not everyone has made an incredible invention, but it's the group, everyone working together, everyone supporting the inventor. So in a way, everyone participated in that, right? To think like that, it gives you that self-confidence. And think, Israel wasn't built in a day, in a week, in a month. It took many, 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 many years. And still, people slowly added more and more and more and more and more causes and conditions came together to now have a country that has an incredible agriculture with very good quality produce and a lot of organic food as well. And, you know, a lot, I mean, if you just Google it, a lot of inventions and made it work, make this country work, bring it from a desert into this oasis. And I'm not saying it's perfect, of course not. I mean, there are a lot of problems. Of course, we're aware of the political problems, but of course they face challenges. Well, that's samsara. That's just our existence. Without problems, it's not going to happen. But the good thing is we can use problems to solve the problems, to learn from our mistakes. That's, again, you can use it in that way. So this has nothing to do with Buddhism. This is just reality. And so to tell them, look, how long did it take for Israel? So, you know, that example. Think of all the inventions. And sometimes the harder it is, the more creative people become. And that is true for the first settlers who came to Israel. Right? Think about it. Many of them came from very modern countries. They came from the US, which was already very progressive in the 40s, right? They had already high rises in New York. And they had streets and shopping, well, malls, I'm not sure. But anyway, so they came from these countries and they left everything behind to start from scratch. I mean, incredible. The first settlers in Israel, they came from countries that were highly developed in comparison to Israel, and they had to start from scratch. And they were okay with it. The discomfort, the mosquitoes, everything, just that. Think what it was like and take examples of that time. Investigate and say, look, they managed, and it brought out their creativity. Well, we can continue with that and then continue doing it. Don't think of the result too much. But if you have all the causes and conditions, you will inevitably get a result. It may just take time, right? So that keeps you going. Don't always check on the result. How can you make more improvements? Bring in that creativity that has helped Jews to survive for centuries. I mean, again, maybe not everyone knows about it, but in every country they lived in, after they had been basically kicked out of Israel, I don't know how many, by the Romans basically, so more than 1,000 years ago, they spread all over the world, pretty much like the Tibetans, but they were not liked. They were not liked for whatever reasons, basically because, well, in Christianity they had that distorted view, Jews killed Jesus, forgetting that Jesus was a Jew, right? And actually it wasn't really the Jews, it was the Romans, but never mind. So there's this distorted view, Christianity, which has the same origin, right? Islam, it all goes down to what is called the Torah in the Jewish context, or the First Testament in the Christian, but it's the same book, the same origin, the same text or scripture. So anyway, the point is that they faced so much persecution over so many years, and still they made it work and survived. So showing that the culture, so culturally, Jews have managed to become very, very, creative, and to focus very much on education, right? Focus on education. And so oftentimes when I teach the Dharma in Israel, it is so much fun because it's so easy to teach some of the most difficult things because they get it right away. I've never met Indians, I find as well, well-educated Indians actually too, but Israelis more so in the sense that they have that debating going on. It's actually part of the Jewish religion. They do debate in the yeshivas, in the religious schools. So this debating, that kind of intellectual exchange is very much part of their culture now. And so right away they ask questions, but the most difficult questions, they get to the crux of it. You don't have to spend much time explaining nitty-gritty details. I'm not saying everyone, but probably the majority or maybe half understand it. It's so rewarding, it's so quick. So all this, Israelis have to realize what makes them so special and use it in a positive way by going, for instance, politically active against, like right now, an autocrat like Netanyahu, who's doing the most horrific things to, of course, the people in Gaza, but also to his own people. Horrific what's going on right now. And we shouldn't blame the Israelis, we should blame this government right now and do something. And a lot of Israelis try to do something, but it seems pretty difficult at this point. Yeah. Anyway, sorry for that. This was not, I went into too many details, but yeah. Anyway, all right. More questions? Yes, Tyler?
So kind of in a similar vein to this, one of the questions in our discussion groups at Tashita was, is there any usefulness to anger? And if we rewind back to the women's rights movement in the 50s and earlier in America, and I say this with the utmost respect to the middle way, this holiness, but there needed to be some feminists flipping over some desks, making some noise. And if we would replay that history with His Holiness is the middle way, does it take another 10 years for women to get the darn right to vote? Right? And of course, it's not that there shouldn't be a necessity for these women flipping over desks. It's the patriarchy and it's the fault of the men.
Yes, I understand.
Right? So it's like, I'm wondering, right, you replay these certain situations, and like you paved the way being the first geisha, and that's amazing, but like 100 years earlier, some nuns flipped over some desks and were like, guys, the Buddha even said.
Yep. I understand.
I'm wondering, and going back to her like political activism here, I think it's more and more challenging because these governments are so powerful. They have drones now. It's just such a different dynamic. Is there some usefulness?
All right. Okay. Now let me just ask you. You can answer this yourself. Let me ask you, what is anger? A mental state or an action? What is anger? Is it a mental state or is it the activity of flipping tables, as you put it?
It's a mental state.
It's a mental state. All right. So it's a kind of, it's first of all realistic or unrealistic? It's unrealistic. Is it extreme or not?
It's exaggerated, yeah.
It's exaggerated. Okay. Now, strong activities, strong actions. First of all, like flipping tables, of being assertive, of speaking up, not being like what you would call gentle and soft-spoken, but really, does that require a measured activity, or is it okay to go over the top? What do you think is most realistic? Right measurement, right? Does that right measurement have to come from anger, or could compassion also lead to strong activities? Remember the story I told you about His Holiness kicking out this monk during the teachings? Was that flipping tables? I'd say so. It was pretty, I mean, he didn't physically lash out, but the bodyguards pretty much, picked up this boy or this monk and kicked him out. Was that out of compassion, His Holiness's instructions? 100%. 100%. So, therefore, compassion has two advantages. More than that, but two main ones that come to mind. It's measured in accordance with reality. So it's not focusing on the side that you may go against, let's say men. So it's not like you're on the side of women and you hate men, that kind of attitude. No, it has equal compassion, understanding that men are suppressing women at that time, definitely, very much so, and not every man, but certain men suppress women and harming themselves, therefore creating the causes to be suppressed one day themselves. While women experience incredible suppression and therefore their incredible potential being not able to thrive, not being able to come to the surface. Therefore, the whole world is missing out, right? I mean, this potential that you could utilize to make improvements, well, that is being suppressed. Therefore, everyone suffers. Based on that understanding and understanding that what we would call gentle measures, right? Yeah, it's not helpful, and you act out of compassion strongly. Not only does the action become measured, appropriate, not pissing off one side to such a degree that they lash out again, which if it was hatred, it would be more extreme and also make men possibly fight back because they feel personally attacked. No, it's out of compassion, which doesn't take it to a personal level. Number one. Secondly, anger is exhausting. Anger, it's very tiring. It can give you this push, but then you're exhausted. It's stressful. To be full of anger and hatred stresses you out. You can only do it for that long. Try to be angry the whole day. You probably need much more sleep that night. Compassion, in comparison, gives you more energy. Compassion gives you so much energy that you no longer need to sleep. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I believe, is such a good example of that, because, or Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I mean, the way they worked, Lama Zopa Rinpoche unfortunately no longer being around, and of course His Holiness is now manifesting old age. Of course, you can't expect the same from someone who's 90, but when His Holiness was in his 70s, 60s, I mean, younger anyway, the energy he had, right? And sometimes being wrathful, don't do it like this. And he'd be like, so, right? You'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, he wasn't always like gentle, kind of soft-spoken. He was wrathful, but it was all from compassion. So therefore, the effectiveness of strong actions, the same actions you described, strong actions out of like flipping tables, turning tables, right? Coming from a resentful and hateful mind is too extreme. It becomes mad, so it goes over the top, and therefore doesn't come with that wisdom and understanding. Wisdom does not go well with resentment and hatred, so therefore the action becomes too strong and ineffective, therefore, in comparison, versus the compassionate one, still the same expression of like strength, but coming from love and compassion. And there's no continuity. Continuity is difficult out of hatred because you get too exhausted, you get burned out. So oftentimes strong actions requires long-term activity. And if it's based on hatred, you'd have a burnout. You won't be able to continue. So others have to take over. They have different ways of doing things. So you're going like zigzag. There's no real continuity. And then they burn out before long. But we have to understand compassion doesn't mean you become a punching bag. The opposite. If you allow yourself to become a punching bag, you're not a compassionate person, because you're allowing that person to harm you, right? It's not about, oh, I'm getting harmed, I need to fight back out of hatred. It's about love and compassion. You stop that person because they're harming themselves, and they're harming others because you're probably not the only punching bag you're not the only person who's a punching bag of that person. So compassion is strong. Compassion has courage. You don't care about your own benefit. But like sometimes we don't know what is hatred and what is not. Anger with an injustice is not anger or hatred. You can't really hate an injustice, even though we may say that. So it's okay to be enraged with an injustice, but don't be enraged with a person, because that's the problem. In one of his books, His Holiness actually mentions it. I forget whether it was part of a question and answer. I forget what book it was. Was it Secular Ethics? Or was it another book? I forget. But if you read His Holiness's books, which I can only encourage, then sooner or later, I guess you come across this, where His Holiness says, there's actually, maybe it's Secular Ethics, there's actually no problem with getting angry or enraged. You wouldn't even say angry, enraged with an injustice. That's not anger or hatred. It's the person. That's the problem. And you don't need that. In fact, it's not beneficial if you have anger towards that person. No, this is not. So we need to learn to understand anger better. And we need to understand, you need to learn even more importantly to understand compassion better. That we take compassion. It's not okay. So in my case, in my own personal case, I knew any kind of strong action, I mean, besides the fact that I lacked that kind of compassion, but even if I had that compassion, strong action, that's just Tibetan society. If you become like outwardly like you should be giving, they don't like confrontation. So the skillful thing, I realized at some point, was just show them that I can do it. It was as simple as that. Show them I can do it, and the world doesn't go down if I, right? It's not like we're doomed if a woman. My classmates, I mean, I was oftentimes, you see, like my classmates, they were like real guys, you know, they were like assertive, and they were like, on the debate ground, they seemed so confident, they seemed so, wow, you know, and when they debated, there's this movement, you know, they raised their foot, you raise your foot and you stamp it, and so I just did the same, and they said, you're very arrogant. You know what, whenever I did the same as they did, they called me arrogant, because Tibetan women, they wouldn't raise their foot that much, they wouldn't raise their voice that much, they're supposed to be humble. So the moment I did what they did, just because they did it, I thought I had to do the same, I was labeled that. And it really bothered me. It really bothered me. Of course, because I didn't understand. But then sooner or later, we got to know each other better. And some of them later on told me that. Like, I didn't know why they always thought I was arrogant if I didn't give up my view right away. You know, like they didn't give up their view right away. I knew it was ridiculous what I said, but I didn't always right away let it go, but played with it. And they used different things from women. So yeah, I think they misunderstood. I'm not saying I'm not arrogant, but what they accused me of being arrogant, it didn't come out of that motivation, out of that. So, but the thing was, I realized confronting them with that wasn't going to, right? They had to get to know me. I had to be patient with that, understand, first of all, why they thought that in the first place. Anyway, it took time, and later on, when we had been very far into our practice, or into our study, and I got to know them better, they got to know me better, and I spent some time talking to some, they actually said, one of them once said, yeah, we kind of got that wrong because you acted like us, and women are not supposed to act like that. So this lifting up my leg too high was such a weird thing. So what? But I did think, okay, I can debate just as much. If it bothers them that much, okay, I'm going to not lift my leg that high. And so that part I give in. But the rest I didn't. I refused to just be like, oh, you're right, okay, you're always right. Kind of like, no way. I didn't do that. Yeah. Anyway, the point is, and again, I'm saying it's not true that I was not always. I was definitely arrogant at times, definitely. But many of the times when I was accused of that, it wasn't right. But I also realized that it was only through gentleness, through consistency. So without confronting them, let them speak, let them do their thing, whatever. Just let it pearl off, like, you know, got oil on your skin and it just pearls off, and show them I can do it. And that was it. It was as simple as that. So just continued, I continued and continued. And the end result was they thought, okay, women can do just the same, right? It's not going to, the Dharma is not degenerating. In fact, there are more now because less monks become monks. Less and less, the modern life is too tempting, less people become monks. So the ordained Sangha is now more supported by studying nuns, right? So the numbers are still there, and there are a lot of very hardworking and studying nuns, which previously they didn't have. In Tibet, they had a lot of nuns, not as many as monks, but quite a number of nuns who never studied. So they never studied. They never studied. Maybe individually, but there was no study program for them in the nunneries. They only did pujas. They only memorized and did pujas. The nuns never. It's incredible, right? And so not even the nuns wanted to study. They didn't want to study. I mean, I know when I first started to study, some of the older nuns weren't very supportive of the younger nuns who now wanted to study, because they were like, we never studied. Yeah, so it was like, it was very different in Tibet. Only the monks studied. But look in the United States or in other places where girls were often not sent to school. I mean, in Germany, like 300, 400, or 500 years ago, women didn't get an education. Their only education was how to lead a household. Even my mom was not allowed to go to high school. Her father didn't allow that. She could only go to the 10th grade, and then she had to find a job. Whereas my father was allowed to go and do the whole thing, but from his family. It was just not allowed. And that's not that long ago. That's like 60, 70 years ago. Women went to school. These were like households. Like they were even called like how to lead a household. My grandmother went to a school where she learned to not control, but run a household. That's it. So it's not that different. Nuns in Tibet learned to memorize, recite the pujas, do the rituals, not really knowing what they were doing. So they did study, but not like the monks. You see? Yeah. And so then His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he realized this is not okay. His foresight was incredible. But when he first talked about nuns studying, Tibetans were like, whoa, this is weird, right? At first, oftentimes they don't understand what His Holiness says. It takes 30 or 40 years later that they go, ah, or sometimes 20 years, right? Like, oh, that's why. And now they see, oh my God, we're so glad we followed His instructions. Reluctantly, but sometimes reluctantly, sometimes willingly. Now the incredible foresight of His Holiness, knowing, right? When His Holiness says we need to learn science, people were like, oh, we need to learn the Dharma. Who cares about science? It's going to destroy the Dharma. No, it keeps the Dharma alive. Because they see the similarities between science and Tibetans are interested in science, very much so now, definitely. But they see it's not that different than the Dharma. So no need to neglect the Dharma. Incredible. And His Holiness knew that 40 years ago. No one did that. Yeah. But His Holiness was assertive at times, gentle at other times when that was required. And that assertiveness and that gentleness. And His Holiness said it again and again and again and again. He said it so many times because people just didn't do it. So he said it again, and he said it again, and he said it again, until finally they started doing it. Wow, His Holiness is so amazing if you think about it. What he accomplished over many years, never giving up, and never losing his patience and dedication, like, I've got enough, I want to go to Goa and just have, no, never ever. You see, that's the difference. Compassion, assertiveness, yes, not anger that crushes you and burns you out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. And it just, in today's society too, with everyone just being focused on these sound bites, you could have a movement that's driven by compassion, that's still, flipping over desks.
Flipping over.
The whole world where the opposing side is like, look at all these angry nuns, look at all, and it'd be wrong, right? It's just, everything goes back to the intention behind it, and everyone would be incorrect in saying, look at all these angry nuns, look at all these angry protesters doing this, and then it's not, because they don't take the time to listen, so then there's this
Exactly.
illusion.
See both sides.
Yeah.
And don't turn into misogynists now hating all men.
Yeah,
Because that's not the solution.
No.
And secondly, think of the greatest political activists.
Martin Luther King.
Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Navalny, the Russian who's just been killed by Putin pretty much. Nelson Mandela. They were not hateful, and I mean, the most recent, I'm a huge fan of Navalny. He spoke up against Putin, but when he spoke, he was never full of anger and hatred. He spoke in a very measured way. He wasn't like, kill Putin, and never like that. He was very calm. The only times that I saw him talk, he always seemed very calm. And Putin tried to kill him at least twice. The first time, they poisoned him and he was on a plane. And you could hear him scream in pain. But he survived that attack, that poisonous attack. Like Russia's got poison that's incredible. It can kill you by just touching you. It touches your skin and you die, right? And so they did something to him. They poked him, I think, I forget now, or gave him something in his tea. And they tried to kill people in England, for instance, as well. In a particular place, I went to that place, tried to kill 2 activists, Russian activists, the father and his daughter, and they didn't manage that. They didn't kill them, but unfortunately they threw away the bottle in which that stuff was in, and someone else got it and died, like a British person, because her husband found it, thought it was perfume, gave it to his wife, she sprayed herself with it, and she died. So the Russian, activists, they weren't killed, but other people were. So I'm just trying to make this point. The Russian government is so powerful with its poison and with the system in which it kills its own people. So eventually Navalny was captured. He went back. He survived the attack. I think he was in Germany and he got treatment there. He went back to Russia to continue his fight. He was then imprisoned. And in prison he died, because then there they could, of course, poison him. But the point is, he was never angry and aggressive. He was always very measured. So this is the most recent example. And he didn't get the same, he wasn't that famous, maybe probably wasn't talked about here in India as much as it was in Germany, for instance. So he's such an incredible example because he still inspires people. But the most famous people, yes, so Mahatma Gandhi, non-violence, right? Non-violence. In fact, doing hunger strikes, so basically harming himself rather than harming others. Speaking up, of course, at times, but still, see the rippling effect. Mahatma Gandhi inspired Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. All non-violence, they are the most effective. Their kindness, their gentleness, their compassion had a much greater effect than anyone else. Like, sometimes people call Che Guevara and what else? Who else? Che Guevara. Or Mao Zedong, they call them like these great revolutionists, but they've acted out of a lot of aggression oftentimes. I mean, Che Guevara killed a lot of people. So he was famous. My uncle had a picture of, I grew up with my uncle having Che Guevara in his room, in his office space kind of thing at home. So whenever I visited him, I could see that picture and I thought, who's this guy? So it was kind of fashionable to have Che Guevara everywhere. But actually, you know, he did a lot for, I think, Argentina, and then he fought, no, Cuba, that's right, Cuba. But he also went to fight and kill people, so it wasn't like all non-violence. And I don't think he made it. He didn't become as famous as some of these beings, some of these activists who chose non-violence. But non-violence does not contradict assertiveness. So in the end, what takes us further? What is more powerful? Compassion and love and non-violent measures, which don't mean you can't apply strong measures sometimes. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm with you for most of that, and I feel like you've been so open about this as like a German, but like if the U.S. would have taken on this non-violence approach for World War II, we'd probably all be speaking German right now. And so like there are times.
No, but
like,
non-violence.
If you go pacifism to an extreme, that's where I'll get into arguments.
No. But non-violence doesn't contradict strong actions. I'm saying strong action can also mean. I give you a story. Okay, let me tell you a story of the Buddha himself. The Buddha once was on a ship with 500 merchants. And there was one of them who was set out to kill all the other 499. And the Buddha knew at that time that that this man was going to kill everyone else. And out of compassion for these 499 merchants and their relatives and so forth, plus for that potential killer, he killed the killer. Yeah, he killed him out of great compassion. So there was no other way to put him in chains and so forth. So of course, maybe if there's another possibility. So to be honest, if someone in Germany or someone in the United States had known what Hitler was about to do and had found a way to kill him before he killed 6 million Jews, and out of compassion, that would have been the best thing to kill. And a lot of people tried to kill Hitler. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. There were a few attempts on his life, and they were all unsuccessful. But the point is, you can, even out of compassion for Hitler, even for Hitler himself, that he doesn't accumulate that incredible non-virtue. So rather to kill him, plus, of course, even more importantly, for his potential victims. But in retrospect, we always know better. We always know better once it's all happened, that it should have, America should have made more of an effort to send someone and kill him, for instance. But of course, that's easily said, but difficult. But I'm saying, even that is allowed. The story of the Buddha, or he was a Bodhisattva then, he actually decided, I'm going to take the non-virtue on myself to kill this person. So he, of course, experienced the result of killing. But because his motivation was so virtuous, the result was very minor. But you have to be extremely careful to have compassion. You can even, but you have to be extremely careful here, because it needs to be wisdom and compassion. Yeah, so don't start assassinating people, thinking you're very wise and compassionate. That's very, very dangerous. But I'm saying, if you have that wisdom and compassion, it is even admissible to kill someone. Okay, it goes as far as that. So, in the ideal case, and we don't live in an ideal world, so let's be realistic. In an ideal world, if there was a Bodhisattva or Buddha who had the wisdom, the foresight, the compassion to kill Hitler, he would have done Hitler and everyone else involved a favor, the whole world, in fact. Okay, now that didn't work out, it didn't happen, it wasn't possible. Yes, go ahead.
So I try to find it more, like here you talk about like one person. Here you talk about one person that does something bad or plans to do something bad. But let's take something more massive.
Yep.
Like terror attack, for example.
A terror attack.
There are hundreds of people that involved in it.
Yep.
And then a war started out of it.
Yes.
Where you cross the line? Like, where do you say this is justified, or this is out of compassion to prevent the suffer of more human beings, and that's why we do what we do? And where it becomes kind of like
extreme.
Switching to something that it's not justified.
Okay. I'm not a good person.
Buddhism, even what the Buddhism said about like wars, for example. Even not your opinion.
Yeah. Oh God, this is really, really difficult. Well, first of all, from a Buddhist point of view, war was at least accepted as a possibility. You know how we know that? Because the Buddha made a special rule for monks. There was, at the time of in India, India didn't exist as a country as now. I just want to give you that background, and then I'll address it more directly. There was a time in India when India consisted of different kingdoms, and they fought each other. And the Buddha knew that. And the Buddha knew he couldn't stop people to do that. So he gave the monks, because at that time only men went to war. And if you were part of a kingdom, you had to go to war sometimes. And even the Buddha couldn't stop that. I mean, the king said, if you don't go to war, your family is going to get killed, you're going to get killed, so you go to war. The Buddha gave a special opportunity to monks. If they have to go to war, they can give back their vows, go to war, fight the war. I mean, you're not allowed to kill as a monk, so you break your root vow. No, you give back your vow, you go to war, and you can go back to being a monk. You could do it 3 times. Because I guess more often than 3 times you weren't asked. It was just the frequencies of wars. Was the Buddha happy about that? No. But what is the lesser evil? If he had been able to stop wars, he would have done that. But the Buddha is not omnipotent. He can only guide people, and whether they or instruct them, and if they take the guide. But he even made that possible. It's not like, okay, you go to war once, that's it, you're done, never mind. Sorry, you can no longer be a monk. So he even accommodated the possibility without supporting it. Now, going back to Israel. Now, I don't know. I don't know. Really, I don't know. What is, if I knew the motivation of people, if I knew, I have no idea. But when the attacks first took place, and that was not done out of compassion, I don't think so. You don't have to kill children in front of your parents. Who does that out of compassion? So the cruelty of what the Hamas did is definitely in no way out of compassion. And it was, I know from people, I know one friend of mine, I used to stay with her. She actually spoke on CNN, they interviewed her in her mamad. She spent hours with her daughter in the mamad, and the terrorists were in her house trying to get in. And because the mamad, the safe room that they built in many of their houses, called mamad, is meant to save you from rocket attacks. Now you don't need to lock the door because the rocket is not going to try. So you can close the door and that's it, you don't need to lock it. So they don't have locks usually. But she found a way to lock herself in and she didn't die. Otherwise she and her daughter would have been killed. They destroyed her house, but they couldn't get into the mamad. So that was aggression, that was not compassion. Anyway, then Israel responded. And responded by attacking Gaza. At that time I was thinking, I mean, come on. Are they going to just allow themselves to be slaughtered like during the Holocaust? I mean, they didn't allow themselves. They weren't aware what was going on. But it felt pretty much, you know, the Germans kept it secret and they didn't know they were sent to different places and they didn't know they were sent to their death. But it must have felt to them they were just led to the slaughter. And they were like, not this time. We're not going to have this happen this time. We were attacked, we strike back. And think of 9/11. What did the United States do? 3,500 people were killed of 350 million Americans. And of course the world was against it. But a lot of people supported them attacking Iraq, basically, as a result of 9/11. Israel lost 1,500 people in those attacks, versus 6 million, so a lot more Israelis got killed in terms of the population, and they went to war. A lot of people criticized Israel. I thought, what are they going to do? Allow for the next attack to happen? Allow for the Hamas to grow stronger, right? And people were enraged. Yes, innocent people got killed. It was terrible. However, the Hamas has their stations in kindergartens, in schools. So if you attack the enemy, you attack. But it wasn't, what can you do? I mean, whose fault is that? But you have to remove this terror organization. So as long as that went on, I understood. Am I saying it's right? No. If there was another solution, I don't know. I'm not a Buddha, and I don't know the motivation of people. But what I know that Bibi, the president of Israel, I don't think he's only there for the benefit of sentient beings. I think he's an autocrat. He behaves like a dictator. And therefore, I don't think his motivation is compassion. I'm just talking about him. And he's in charge. Now, initially, okay. And now the situation with people starving. But I don't know. I don't know what the situation really is. In my mind, this has gone too far now. That's my opinion. But I don't know. And the only reason I think it's extreme mainly is because of the person in charge, who is known to have started wars in the past in order to stay in power. So my problem is with Netanyahu. And everything else, I don't know. I don't know. So this is my opinion, but my personal opinion, which counts for nothing, because I don't know. I don't know. I'm not saying that every strong action is always hateful. So unfortunately, I cannot answer this.
I'm more curious, actually, not even about Israel, like in general, like Buddhism and wars, and like also like the Buddhists, I don't know to like in
Okay.
100% of the time say it's out of compassion or justified or not. Like.
Okay, let me give you this answer. I don't know. I cannot give you a satisfying answer because wars are so complicated. But maybe this answer helps. Compassion should be the driving force, but always keep in mind long-term benefit versus short-term benefit. Long-term benefit versus short-term benefit in terms of wisdom. And most amount of people, as many living beings as possible. And if these are the guiding principles. So then on compassion and wisdom both. And if that means, I tell you something that His Holiness once said in an audience for the Emory students. He said, there was a time when a lot of Tibetans were saying we need to start an armed conflict. We need to go against the Chinese. This is not working. Nonviolence is not working. We need strong measures. We need to adopt violence. And in fact, some Tibetans in Tibet were, like, there were some attacks. They even said there was a bomb attack. So I'm not sure it was actually the Tibetans or the Chinese. No one really knew. They, of course, accused the Tibetans of that. I'm not sure. But there were definitely voices in the Tibetan community. His Holiness's approach is not working. We still don't have freedom. We need to put up arms. We need to take up arms. Now, the Emory students, they had a program where they learned Buddhist philosophy, but they also learned about politics, about the Tibetan culture, the Tibetan politics, so culture and politics both. And as part of that, many of them were very interested in activism, and during the audience, they asked His Holiness about a violent approach. How about this? Exactly that issue. Why does His Holiness not support violence? And what His Holiness said, and I can't quote His Holiness verbatim, but what I remember from what His Holiness said, he said, I am not always against strong measures. He doesn't call it violence because violence implies a mental state of wanting to, okay. So, but these measures that look at the outside as violence. He said, let's be realistic. How strong is the Chinese army? Doesn't the Chinese army have more soldiers than even Tibetans? And then there are Tibetans. I don't know whether there's 6 million Chinese soldiers, but let it be 2 million, for instance. I mean, it's a country of over 1 billion people, so I wouldn't be surprised that they have a few million soldiers. Now, if you start a war in Tibet against the Chinese, he said, if it was a matter of quickly, okay, some casualties, unfortunately, but in the long term, the problem is solved. It helps the Chinese, it helps the Tibetan. I'm not against it, he said. But, so this was His Holiness's stand. He said, if the problem could have been solved by, not a war that goes on for years and years, a few battles, right? Chinese out, Tibet free, I'm all for it. But first of all, where do we get the weapons? How easily? So he took us through the situation. How do you get the weapons? Is it like United States? Can you send us, Amazon, get a box of, I don't know, whatever you need, and then the next day they arrive? Of course, that's ridiculous. You won't get weapons that easily. Those who support China, they're not going to provide Tibetans with weapons. So first of all, you won't even get any weapons. And even if you get weapons, how many young men, you have to train them. You have to, they need to know how to fire a weapon. They need to know to learn warfare. How long does that take? And then up against Chinese soldiers who are what is going to happen? They're going to be slaughtered. So, okay, go ahead, try it out. I mean, he didn't say that, but he basically said, we just lose these young soldiers and things get worse. And we lose our support from the West because the Western world supports Tibetans in their non-violent struggle. They're up against such a powerful enemy and they're still hanging in there without killing Chinese. You see the difference? So it's on the set. He said it, not publicly. He said in that interview, he said, if that was a solution, quickly in, quickly out, as little suffering as possible, have a short war, out, gone, perfect. That was Putin's goal, right? Ukraine, 3 days, and 3 years later, he's still doing it. I don't think his motivation was love and compassion, but it was that idea. 3 days in, get the Ukraine, and now 3 years later, still going on. So it doesn't work. Yes?
You know, in that same context, Gandhi was very shrewd because he saw exactly the same situation with the British. There's no way India would have won if we had gone to war with the British.
Yeah.
That was not the solution.
Gandhiji. Yeah.
So the skillful, even though it may seem longer and more difficult, that is actually what worked for us.
And that got the support of the world as well.
That got the support.
And it inspired so many other people. So let me just say this because we don't have the microphone. So Venerable Benjamin is saying, look at what Gandhiji did. Like he knew a war with the British, although they're more Indians than Brits, but their war machines were so sophisticated, their soldiers were so sophisticated, they knew it's not going to end well. So instead of choosing the quick solution, which is not really a solution, he decided take it slow, take time. And in the end, India got its independence.
And the moral support.
And the more support of the world. And it had this ripple effect. You know, South Africa was liberated because of Gandhi. The civil rights movements in the United States was inspired by Gandhi. So not only did Gandhiji liberate India, but he also is indirectly responsible for removing apartheid. He's responsible for the civil rights movement, and he's responsible for His Holiness, who always quotes Gandhiji, saying, I'm a disciple of Gandhiji. I'm inspired by that. And his whole effort was based on, first of all, understanding a war is not realistic, and also on seeing that Gandhiji, he succeeded. And of course, the Tibetan struggle is longer, has been going on for longer, but of course the numbers, in terms of numbers, and it hasn't going, I mean the Brits, India has been under British rule for so much longer.
200 years.
How many years?
190.
190 years? Yeah, so much longer actually, yeah. Anyway, yeah, those are really good examples of what works better. Hopefully, Ronnie, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was wondering because I thought to myself, like, maybe the Buddhism would be, okay, I don't know if it's harder than more, but naive, like, kind of, and then you just have to,
Yeah.
in terms of, like, what's realistic and what makes sense.
Yeah, it's a really good point you're bringing this up. You're bringing up a very good point. Is Buddhism not a little naive? I don't think Buddhism is naive, but Buddhists can be naive.
Yeah, but it's the same like I think with compassion. You said compassion is not like, oh, you're so cute.
Yeah.
Someone amazing view. No, it's like
No.
you have boundaries. So it actually makes more sense.
Yeah, compassion is a mental state. Compassion is a mental state. So what Ronnie just said, and I think she has a good point, again, because of the microphone, don't worry, I can just repeat it, it's faster. So Ronnie is saying, yeah, I was wondering about that, like strong actions, sometimes they're required. However, isn't Buddhism a little naive with that whole compassion? And I think when I said some Buddhists can be, I'm saying we're just ordinary humans, we call ourselves Buddhist, and so we can be very naive. We can be very naive. I mean, the way I just described it, like the Buddha story, as if it was that easy. This is just a story that is supposed to guide us, but things are a lot more complicated usually than that. And even I thought, why did he have to kill that guy? Just overpower him, put him in chains and send him home, right? So this story here, of course, is not about that. It's about, there's really nothing you could have done. That's how I usually tell it. So therefore, there's nothing you could have been done, and so this was an example. But things are always a lot more complicated, and let's not be naive in the sense that we think, oh, things can be easily done if you're just nice and smiley. No way. So but I'm saying if you can choose between hatred and compassion based on wisdom, and still also apply strong actions, I think that's the better choice. But being human, also we need to understand we won't always be compassionate.
Where are the tantric sorcerers when you need them?
Pardon?
Said I'm joking, right? But where are the tantric sorcerers and the witchcraft when you need them to take on the Chinese army a little bit?
Where are the tantric sorcerers who could?
It would be nice to take on them.
Right? Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm pretty sure the tantric masters of Tibet could actually use black magic, if you like, to take on. But if the Tibetans don't have the karma right now, you see, this is also important. The karma the Tibetans still have the karma to have that situation go on. So I'm thinking of, for instance, India. India's karma was also there in the beginning, but then slowly it was exhausted. It became, it wasn't as strong there any longer. And then Gandhiji came in, did of course encourage a non-violent struggle, which many Indians follow, which further was responsible for that karma to be exhausted. So that was the end of it. Tibetans isn't yet. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama has oftentimes said, it's very important to look at Tibet's history just before they lost their freedom. There was a lot of mess. It was messy. The Dharma wasn't practiced as purely by many individuals. It still was, but there was corruption, there were problems. The monasteries were actually in competition with each other. They actually went to war at some points, like the monks attacking. So not everyone, but there were like a lot of political corruption and so forth. So His Holiness said, we created the causes as a community. So yeah, it was not all peaceful. Everyone is practicing the Dharma in the perfect way. And in a way, it shook everything up. That kind of old-fashioned, being so stuck in your ways. And His Holiness established democracy, which was, and can get rid of some of these rituals, these heavy rituals, which had nothing to do with Buddhism. He really shook up everything. But the karma is still not, so it did make a great change. I mean, the world, we benefited so much. We wouldn't be here because Tibet was a forbidden country. You weren't allowed to go into Tibet. The very few who made it, they smuggled their way in. Yeah, the very few, who were they? What's his name? The Austrian. Heinrich Harrer. Heinrich Harrer and Peter something, they made it. And then, of course, in the past, there was this lady from France who studied under the Way of the White Cloud. Like, this book was also written by someone who was in Tibet and learned all that. But they weren't allowed to go in. There were only a handful of them who made it, dressing up like Tibetans and made it in. And, of course, already brought out some of the incredible Buddhism that existed in Tibet. But we didn't have access, and people didn't have access to it. It was very difficult to get in. The point is now we have access to it. So in the long term, it shook up that old system that was no longer really working and wasn't effective, and it was corrupt in many ways. Plus, the world had access to it, which is important to preserve the Dharma. The Dharma would have probably degenerated if Tibet had continued like that, because there was a lot of corruption. Nuns didn't study. The monks, yes, they did, and they were great practitioners. But sooner or later, the young people would have said, oh, this is all rubbish, moving towards the West. If China hadn't come in, I believe it would have been like in some places like Ladakh and Zanskar, where the young people don't like Buddhism. They think it's the old ways. And now they're Westerners. Sometimes they invite Westerners to come there and talk about the Dharma in English, and they suddenly think it's cool. We're just talking about what their old teachers taught us in a different language. But because we speak in English, it seems cool. You know, Geshe Dorje Damdo, he's a cool teacher, so a lot of Ladakis and Sanskaris are actually following him. But he's not teaching anything separate than their uncles and their grandparents. No, well, their uncles. Their uncles could be monks, their grandfathers wouldn't be probably, unless they became monks later in life. But the point is, yeah, so it needs to be shaken up. And that's what his Holiness did. In the long term, the Dharma can be preserved. Yeah, a lot of it was destroyed, unfortunately, but what to do? Yeah, so.
Can I share, just since we've
Of
spent
course.
maybe this time, one more person, Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, he is an amazing example.
Say again, who?
Thich Nhat Hanh.
Krishna Han?
Thich
Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah.
The Vietnamese,
Yeah. Because
Vietnamese Lama.
he went into exile, right?
Yeah.
When that war happened between the North and the South.
Right.
But then what did he turn to? He turned to creating these centers where he was creating, in a way, warriors. Maybe this is a naive view on mindfulness warriors, warriors of compassion, warriors of peace. And I wonder sometimes in countries like this where we are facing this situation, where if we, instead of getting upset at the governments that we really can't do much about, if we create these spaces and realize the value of compassion and mindfulness and love, that slowly will begin to ripple out. Because why join the anger? That's not going to help us. It just creates that sense
It breeds more
of
anger.
depression and hopelessness and that vicious cycle. So we have something precious. How do we, maybe this is the opportunity to really begin to, germinate these kinds of things starting with ourselves, within our communities, to slowly begin to spread. And then that's going to take time. It's not going to be easy. But that goes back to rationally thinking. Would this really work in the long term? And really believing and seeing that has happened. That's the only way, in a way. Because otherwise you're creating the seeds for further wars, which is what we have done so effectively all over the world. When will this stop then? I mean, that's a naive view, but that's what the leaders have shown. That's what His Holiness is saying. But of course, you can see the younger generation struggling with this. It's like,
Yes, of course.
come on, let's just get over it. But do you get over it if you take that strategy?
You see, the thing is, I think, since it's samsara, as long as we have afflictions, as long as, we have this samsara as part, of course, there'll always be aggression and it will never be ideal. But I think we're having these masters, these beings who guide us, and I totally agree with you, if they continue to inspire us that way, we can all personally overcome our own afflictions and go in that way. And maybe one day, and the idea is logically, one day everyone will become a Buddha and this samsara won't exist. As long as it is samsara, of course there'll be afflictions, there'll be anger, but all we can do is change ourselves and be examples to others and then hopefully guide them. Yes. So it's not naive, I think. It's naive to believe with all our afflictions we can bring in lasting peace. That's just not going to happen. But I think it's realistic to work towards overcoming these and help others to overcome these afflictions. And hopefully one day there won't be any samsara and then all that becomes a reality. Yeah, no, I agree with you. But in the meantime, not to give up and to be patient because it's going to take a long time. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, great. We had all these discussions and I hope some of your questions were answered. Okay, my plan was a different one, but I do believe it's important to answer your questions. Very important, so I don't want to suppress that, but maybe now we can go, we'll have a break in about 10 minutes, but let me say something about what I want you to meditate on so that we can do the meditation after the break. What I want you to meditate on, and of course the meditation will be guided, will be on the absence or the non-existence of a permanent, partless, independent self. Now, you may feel, but I believe in that anyway. Yeah, but it's different to taking that belief to a deeper level. First of all, very important, there is no permanent I. That is very important. Now, the next meditation that I want to do is more from the, okay, so I want to do this from, I want to do 2 meditations actually in the break, if we find the time. One meditation I would like to do is on reflecting on the impermanence of the self, for instance. Most importantly, an impermanent self. That's the whole point. Impermanence, having parts, being made of parts. We won't go into as many details on that, and not existing like a pea in a pot. So just stress that once again, internalize it. But the permanent is most important, and that will be the next meditation. That is not so much wisdom, but more method, more the emotional. What is the emotional I'm addressing? As long as we believe in permanence, there are 2 negative emotional states that are harmful. One is guilt, the second is holding a grudge, holding onto resentment. Well, what is guilt? A sense that I am these mistakes. So both, understanding that the self has parts, so it's not partless and it's not permanent, that counteracts guilt. Guilt is a negative emotion. It's a kind of resentment directed at ourselves for past actions. So even it was 10 minutes ago, even it was an hour, it's different to remorse. Thinking, okay, that was wrong, I can see that. If I could go back in time, I would do it, but I can't go back in time. I can only, from now on, make sure I don't do the same again. That is healthy and realistic remorse. Versus guilt, where first of all, I identify with the action. I am my negative action. That would mean the I has no parts that are not the I. So that would mean I'm partless. I am my mistakes. That's ridiculous. Therefore, to not identify with my mistakes, and this for the next meditation. I don't want you to do this when we reflect on impermanence, and I just want you to understand that's where we're heading at. Because that's more the wisdom aspect. Understanding there's no impermanent I, there's only an impermanent I, and that has parts. That's the preparation, the wisdom. And then for the next part, the method part, which we'll discuss it a little bit, but I might as well say something about it now, is about dealing with guilt. Dealing with guilt and that regret that is like, if I just had, not being able to let it go, right? Guilt in the sense, or this regret, this is an unrealistic regret. Like it's the kind of guilt. If I had just not done this, right? That constant going back and back and back, feeling bad, feeling terrible, and all that based on identifying with the negativity as that's the I, and secondly, that is me, and secondly, this is not, I'm still that person. I cannot change, I've done this, and I'm defined by that, even though I'm no longer that, right? Of course, you could also, if you have a problem with like as a victim of something, so not being the perpetrator and therefore having guilt, but feeling like you're that helpless victim. If you experienced any kind of abuse of a sexual kind, of a verbal kind, of whatever kind, here, being bullied, for instance, you know, in school maybe, or whenever you've been bullied, sometimes it also feels like I'm a victim. We've labeled victim. So what happened to me, it happened to a body or the mind. It wasn't like there's like well, there's an I, of course, it's labeled on the basis of that, but the conventional I, nevertheless, is neither the body that was harmed nor the mind that was harmed. So to not identify so strongly with, okay, my feelings were hurt, maybe my body was, but I'm not my body. So in a way, First of all, it's done. It's over. I don't have the same body that was abused at that time. I no longer have that body. It's gone. I no longer am a victim. So at that time I was a victim. The term victim applies. But what actually happened, it was my body and I'm not my body. If someone were to kick me in the bum or touch my breast, actually it's my body, it's not me. So one thing we feel bad about, we carry it with us. I mean, in the end, I'm not my breasts. It's not, it was not my problem. It was the person's problem. They did it. I didn't do it. Just the fact that I have breasts, what can I do? Or certain parts of my body, if they touch them. So sometimes we identify with different body parts in a different way, but actually, this body part is no longer there in the same way as it used to be. And secondly, it happened then, it's not now, and I'm no longer a victim. So to let that go, that debilitating sense, I'm a victim, right? It happened to me. Feeling embarrassed about it, feeling shameful about it. Well, if someone hits me over the head or touches me in an inappropriate place, in the end, it's their problem, the person who did that. So to understand that without hatred, but just saying it's not me feeling ashamed and so forth. I think that's also really important because it's something that never lets, people feel ashamed for being raped. You don't need to feel ashamed for being, it's just not your problem. You didn't do anything. Just existing, right? It's important that you exist, you contribute to society, your existence is important. If someone does this, well, first of all, it's not you, it's your body, and it's not you. The body doesn't exist in that way any longer, and you have nothing to be ashamed of, right? And you're not a victim now, let it go. But your experience, of course, could be very beneficial to others. So in that way, that's very important, understanding you have parts. You are not your body, you are not your mind, plus you're impermanent. You see how just this simple understanding, once it's internalized, can take you to a level where you can let go. But also your hatred towards others, your resentment, holding a grudge against others, which can be just as painful, right? Disliking yourself or not forgiving yourself, that we need to learn by understanding how body and mind really exist and the I exists, but also when it comes to others. Because just as destructive as self-hatred and so forth is, it is when it's directed at someone else. And again, that helps us. The other person, they're not their action. The other person is controlled by their mind. The other person are not the same person yet. They're not the same person. They have changed. They're not the person who harmed us. That doesn't mean they may not do it again, but there's no contradiction because even though they may do this, anyone could do this to us, but we don't necessarily hate them. We hate them for what they have done. And they are no longer that person who is doing this to us right now, right? They may do it again, but anyone may do it again, and that doesn't mean we hate anyone. Very important, right? Any potential rapist, yeah, who has never done anything to us, we don't hate them. We don't hate them. If they have done something to us in the past, that's why they hate them. We hate them for that moment when they did it to us, but that's not the same person. Even though they could potentially do the same thing, but they're not doing it right now. But that hatred feels like they're doing it to us right now because we think that past person and the person now are the same. And that's our mistake in that moment. And that's why it allows for an extreme emotion that really harms us to fester. Am I making sense? So you see, wisdom, which will be the first meditation, don't focus on the emotional aspect. First I thought I'm not going to tell you because otherwise you're tempted to go in that direction. But now I'm thinking as long as I just guide you through the wisdom aspect and you don't get into the emotional stuff, just to deepen your knowledge, internalize it. It prepares your mind for then, take a break, I'll say a little bit about it again, to do the second meditation, right? Okay, but now it's time for tea. All right, So we have 15 minutes this time. Can we shorten the break? Can we shorten the break a little bit? Because we have we only have an hour after that, not even an hour. So if we meet at 35 again, 10:35 again, then we have 20 minutes for the 2 meditations. And I think that gives us enough time, yes.
This is to ask everyone, including Geshema. So, of course, we had like a really good discussion. And if we actually want to continue, or maybe some other time, we can switch off the camera and the recordings so we can have more
Intimate
open
discussions.
Exactly. Right? Would that be
Ah.
fine with you?
Can you cut, if anyone feels uncomfortable with the discussions we had, we can also maybe later on cut the material.
We can do that.
We can cut it out. If any of you feels uncomfortable, please, you can say so. But also we could, it always depends. If you don't feel uncomfortable with your question and the answer, then it may also benefit others. But if you feel uncomfortable, we can always switch off the recording. So you're welcome to say so, right? Because if I'm thinking if this question and the answer could be beneficial to others, then of course I would want it to be on the recording, yeah. All right, yeah, but that's a good point. Thank you for suggesting that. All right, so 10:35, we'll come together. We'll come back, please. It might be a bit late, yes. But I'm still waiting for Venerable Thupten Bedun. Who's there? Oh, you're there. Simran, of course. Okay. All right. Okay. Well. We could start with some breathing meditation, and then I can wait for everyone, but the mind calms down, and so. Now focus your attention on yourself, on your sense of I. If there is a reasonably strong sense so that it's identifiable right now, focus on that. And if there isn't, think back of times in the past. When you were maybe wrongly accused of something. When you were put on the spot and embarrassed. So whenever there was a strong sense, I, remember how that felt. How did the I appear to your mind? Either then or now. Does the I feel permanent? In the sense that it's still the same I right now, as the one that got up this morning. That had breakfast and tea. So the sense that something that happened to us in the past still strongly identifying with it right now. And then remember, such an I is impossible. The I is merely labeled on the basis of mind and body. And mind and body are constantly changing. Think of your body. The blood is in constant movement. Your heart is beating away. And on a cellular level, there's a constant in and out of every cell. Proteins and other molecules. Entering cells. Exiting cells. Old cells going out of existence, new ones growing. With that, which are the building blocks of the cells, the atoms, neurons, protons, in constant movement. Never the same from one moment to the next. From moment to moment, growing older, aging. Really get a sense how your entire body is never the same from one moment to the next. Even if we're not aware of it, looking at ourselves in a mirror. Because course change that we may notice is only possible if there's this subtle, momentary change. The same can be said about our mind. Or to be more precise, the different kind of minds. Sense consciousnesses and the different types of mental consciousness. Always changing. And even if there are mental patterns that are similar, similar thoughts, similar emotions, they're not identical. Slightly different every time they arise. As our mind is always changing. Sense consciousnesses are constantly changing because the objects they perceive, visual objects, sounds, smells and so forth, well, they are changing. Moment by moment. Therefore, what appears to the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose, the tongue, and the body consciousness is also always different. Even if we're not really aware of that difference. Similarly, our mental consciousness is in constant movement due to the new impressions of the external environment, thus having new experiences lead to new mental ways of dealing with these external inputs. but also receiving new information through news, books, films, and so on. Therefore, since body and mind are always changing, and the I is just labeled on their basis, the I is different from moment to moment. And since that ever-changing I that does exist as a merely labeled entity is dependent or labeled in dependence on mind and body, it can't exist as a partless, an independent entity. So it's impermanent, has parts, and dependent. Yet being labeled on any of its parts, and these parts not being identical, it's important to know that the I is not its parts. You are not your body. You are not your mind. You're not your failure, and you're not your success. They're just parts of you. Inseparably linked to you. which means it doesn't make sense to identify with just one aspect of yourself. Aspects that are constantly changing. So now to conclude, whatever feeling you can elicit as a conclusion to your analysis, now apply a single-pointed meditation without analyzing and focus on that emotion and allow for it to sink deeper through your focus. Sorry, that was a little short. I could have stretched that emotional response a little bit, but you still know what it feels like if you had a response. I mean, what would that response be like? Whoa, I'm really changing, and I'm not my failure, I'm not my success. Kind of like, just making it up here, but like, ooh, I really am not. So it's kind of like an emotional conviction or insight, for lack of a better word. But even if you didn't have enough time to let it sink in, you could always do that on a different occasion. Connect back to that emotion and again, allow for it to sustain it for some time and be with you so that it goes deeper. But I had to stop it here because I still want to do the second meditation. Now, I'm stretching it a little bit here, like I make you meditate for a longer period. If you find it helpful to just clear your mind, to stand up, you could do that as I keep saying, just a few things in preparation for the next meditation. And then you could sit down the moment we start, or at least stretch in such a way that you're not going to be in unbearable pain for the next meditation. So what I'd like you, but still listen, please. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, thank you. So what I'd like you to do for the next part, now the mind is prepared, hopefully enough to get a sense of impermanence, to get a sense that, okay, our parts and the I are inseparably linked, but the I is neither of these parts, it's merely labeled on the basis of those. So then to go back and access feelings of guilt, for instance, if that's something you have a hard time with. Even if you were bullied, for instance, so you don't have guilt, but you feel like just the fact this happened to you, you may still feel embarrassed or humiliated, you may still feel to be a victim, or if it wasn't bullying, it was some kind of abuse or insult, whatever, it still pains you. Going back, right? And I'll allow you to, I'll suggest that so you in the meditation can do that. And then apply the fact, you're not that person. You're no longer, your mind has changed, your body has changed. In that moment, you could be called the one who's being bullied, the victim, etc. But now, you're not. To let it go. It's there, okay, it happened, it's part of your memory. But memory is really just that. It's a mental reflection of what's there. It's not what's happening right now. And even if emotions pop up, these emotions are not the same as before. We held on to them from before and make them, because we don't let go, allow for them to arise again. But in actuality, we're just holding on to it, although it's no longer there. We hold on to it as if it was still there. And either still feel inferior, or still feel hurt, or feel guilty. But on top of having changed, if we did something, that is not the I. It's labeled on the basis of that. That's just a part of it. But we're so much more than that. We have so many other good qualities. If there's guilt, for instance, or if there is, on the other hand, feeling like a victim, well, there's one aspect of us that became the victim. Not every part of us was insulted. Not every part of us was bullied and so forth. Only certain parts. And even justly or unjustly, if we have made a mistake, well, there was a mistaken part, but we are so much more. If unjustly, anyway, there's no part of it that justified it. And again, that helps us to let go. Also letting go when it comes to the other person, as in like, they are not their mistakes and they are not the same. Okay? So in both ways. And you can, I'll mention all of them with regard to yourself, all possibilities, and you pick the one you find for yourself is most relevant. First I start with ourselves, and then I mentioned others in terms of still holding on to some kind of resentment. Okay? So let's start as before. We'll do some breathing, and then I'll continue to guide you through it. So now, based on your sense of an impermanent I that is merely labeled on any part of us, which means we are not these parts. Pay attention to feelings of guilt due to past actions, past mistakes, or feelings of being a victim of some insult or some abuse. Focus on these feelings without identifying with them, without allowing them to take over, but rather focus on them like an observer. So first of all, whether it's the mistaken action you feel guilty for, or the feeling of humiliation, or being a victim, well, you are not what happened to you, and you are not what you've done. Since it's just a part of it, a part of you at that time. And you were so much more than just that. You may have made a mistake. But you also did a lot that was right. And it's an opportunity to learn from these past mistakes. Likewise, you may have been verbally or physically abused or insulted. But not every part of you was abused or insulted. And again, you could actually use that abuse or insult in a positive way. To help others who had similar experiences. Thus use it in a positive way. But most importantly, you are no longer that person. Your body has changed since that time. Totally changed. therefore it's not identical with that past body. Not a single part of your body is identical to a single part of your body then. Every atom has changed. And of course your mind has as well. There's not a single aspect of your mind that is identical to your past mind. So, all that is left is your memory. A mind that may very well be distorted, since memory is not reliable. And may change over time. Usually not seeing the full picture. Plus, the object it perceives, the past event, we can't let go. Well, that's long gone. Yet our mind has become attached to that event, to identifying ourselves with that event. Even though it's unpleasant. Even though it's not I. It's not me, and it's long gone. The same is true for those we may still resent for what they've done to us. It was not them, in the sense it was their anger or some other negative state of mind controlling their actions when they did to us what they did. Which is why it makes sense to resent that mental state, and not the person. Plus, the person right now is not harming us. And the one who did is no longer there. Since the person now is not the person of the past. Which means that our feelings of guilt, our feelings of being humiliated, being a victim, and our holding a grudge, resenting someone for what they've done in the past, are not based on reality. They're based on an unrealistic holding on to the past. Continuing to harm us due to our mind not being able to let go. forgive the person, whether ourselves or someone else. And to move on. So now to conclude, whatever emotional response that arises naturally or that you have to elicit, and especially letting go. Emotionally letting go. Focus on that for a few moments to allow for it to be permeate your mind to a deeper level, on a deeper level.